My neighbor had been filming my yard for 7 months. I found out the way you find out things in neighborhoods, through someone else, through the particular efficient network of information that exists between houses on a quiet street where people notice things and eventually tell each other about them. Our neighbor on the other side, a retired woman named Gloria who missed nothing and said most of it, told me over the fence on a Saturday morning that she had seen Frank, the man who lived to our left, a solitary, watchful man in his 60s with whom I had exchanged approximately 40 words in 3 years, adjusting a camera on his fence post. Pointed, she said, not at the street, pointed at my side yard. I thanked Gloria. I went inside. I told my husband David what she had said. David said it was probably nothing. He said Frank was probably worried about his property line. There had been a dispute about it 2 years earlier that had resolved without drama, and that the camera was probably pointed at the fence, not the yard. He said not to make it into something. I thought about it for 2 days. Then I knocked on Frank's door. Frank answered on the second knock. He was the kind of man who looked at you for a long moment before saying anything, as though he was calculating something. I had never found this comfortable, and I did not find it comfortable on his doorstep on a Monday evening. I said, "Frank, I need to talk to you about the camera on your fence." He looked at me. He said, "Come in." I said, "I'd rather talk here." He said, "You'll want to come in." Something in the way he said it, not threatening, not unkind, but weighted in a way that made me understand the sentence was information rather than invitation, made me step inside. We stood in his hallway. He did not offer tea. He said, "How much do you want to know?" I said, "Everything." He said, "I installed the camera in March because I saw someone in your yard at night. I was going to tell you, and then I thought I should understand what I was looking at first. Then I kept watching because I kept seeing things I didn't understand, and then I understood them, and then I didn't know what to do." I said, "Show me." He sat me down in his living room in front of a monitor. He pulled up 7 months of footage. He said, "I'm going to skip to what matters, Tuesday mornings, between 9 and 11. I said, "I'm at work on Tuesday mornings." He said, "I know." He pressed play. I want to be careful about how I tell you what was on the footage because some of it belongs to people who did not ask to be in this story, and because some of it is part of a legal process that has its own timeline. What I will tell you is this. Every Tuesday morning for 7 months, between 9 and 11, while I was at work, my husband David met a man in our side yard. Not a stranger, a man I knew, a colleague of David's, someone who had been to our house for dinner, whose wife I had made conversation with at a work event, whose name I will not use because his family did not choose to be in this story either. They did not meet for the reason I initially thought they were meeting. This is the part of the story where the nature of the betrayal is not what the footage first suggests, and is, in the specific way that real things are complicated, worse than what I initially understood. What they were doing in my side yard on Tuesday mornings was conducting transactions. David had been, for the better part of a year, involved in something that I cannot describe with legal specificity, but that I will describe in these terms. He was doing something in my yard, with my yard as the location, that he had no right to do and that I had no knowledge of, and that was, when I eventually understood the full scope of it, the kind of thing that ends marriages and careers and results in conversations with attorneys of more than one kind. I sat in Frank's living room and I watched 7 months of Tuesday mornings, and somewhere around the 3rd month of footage, I stopped thinking about Frank's camera entirely. Frank had made me tea by the time I finished. I had not noticed him making it. I had been looking at the screen. He set the cup beside me. I said, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He said, "I wasn't sure what I was looking at for the first couple of months, and then when I was sure, I didn't know if you knew. I didn't know how to come to your door and tell you something like this." I said, "How did you decide to tell me at all?" He said, "I didn't. Gloria saw the camera and told you, and then you knocked on my door and asked, and I decided that if you were going to ask directly, you deserved a direct answer." I thought about that. I said,
I came here to be angry at you. He said, I know. I said, I'm not angry at you. He said, I know that too. He had a copy of everything on a drive. He handed it to me, a small USB drive, the ordinary kind, the kind that fits in a pocket, containing 7 months of Tuesday mornings and everything they contained. I put it in my jacket pocket. I said, Thank you, Frank. He said, I'm sorry. I said, So am I. Then I went home and I sat at the kitchen table where David and I had eaten 7 years of dinners, and I put the drive on the table in front of me and I thought about what I was going to do next.
I did not confront David that evening. This surprises people when I tell them. They expect that coming home with a USB drive containing 7 months of footage of your husband doing something in your own yard would produce an immediate confrontation, the righteous anger, the demand for answers, the scene. I did not have a scene. I had been trained by 37 years of being myself and by whatever particular combination of temperament and experience had produced me to not act in moments of maximum emotion, to wait, to understand what I had before I decided what to do with it. I made dinner. David came home and said it smelled good, and I said thank you. We ate dinner, and I asked about his day, and he told me about it, and I listened, and the drive was in my jacket pocket, which was hanging on the hook by the door 3 feet from where we sat. I did not sleep that night. I want to be honest about that. I lay in the dark, and I thought about 7 months of Tuesday mornings, and the man whose wife I had made conversation with at a work event, and what my side yard had been used for without my knowledge or consent. In the morning, before David was awake, I called my attorney. Her name was Sandra, the same Sandra I have called in difficult moments before, because when you find an attorney who is efficient and direct and without sentimentality, you keep her number. I told her what I had and what was on it in the careful, ordered way I had learned to tell difficult things. She was quiet for a moment. She said, Don't let that drive out of your possession. Come and see me this morning. I said, I'll be there at 9. The meeting with Sandra was 2 hours. She reviewed the drive. She asked specific questions about what was visible in the footage, about Frank, and about the legal standing of footage taken by a neighbor from their own property. She connected me within 48 hours with a second attorney, a specialist whose area of practice I will not specify because it would narrow the details of this story too much. The two of them together built a picture of what I was dealing with that was, when I sat across from it in Sandra's office on a Thursday afternoon, significantly larger than what I had understood in Frank's living room. The Tuesday morning transactions had implications that extended well beyond my marriage. I will not detail those implications because they are not mine to detail publicly. What I will tell you is that the drive Sandra's colleague sent to the relevant authorities was received with the specific professional attention of people who had been looking for exactly this kind of evidence from exactly this direction. David did not know any of this was happening. He came home every evening, ate dinner, and watched television, and was, as far as he knew, a man whose wife was fine, whose marriage was ordinary, whose side yard was just a side yard. I was very good at ordinary by this point. I had had practice.
The conversation with David happened on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the Monday evening I had knocked on Frank's door. 3 weeks of ordinary evenings, 3 weeks of dinner and television and the particular, demanding discipline of performing a marriage you have already decided is over, while the process that will end it correctly is still in motion. He came downstairs and I was at the kitchen table, with the drive on the table in front of me and my phone beside it and Sandra's number on the screen. He said, "What's that?" I said, "Sit down, David." He sat down. I said, "Frank has a camera on his fence. It covers our side yard. He installed it in March, and he has footage of every Tuesday morning from March to this week." David looked at the drive. I said, "I've watched all of it. Sandra has a copy. Her colleague has a copy. The relevant authorities have been contacted." He said, "Claire." I said, "I'm not asking for an explanation. I have 7 months of footage. I don't need an explanation." He looked at the table. I said, "You should go leave today. There's a hotel on Marsh Street. Sandra will be in touch Monday." He said, "How long have you known?" I said, 3 weeks. He looked at me with the expression of a man trying to understand something about the person across from him that he has not previously understood. I said, "You should go pack a bag." He went upstairs. I heard him moving around. I sat at the kitchen table and I held my coffee and I looked at the drive and I thought about Frank in his living room saying, "I didn't know how to come to your door and tell you something like this." I thought, he came to the door anyway. Sometimes the most important thing is that someone comes to the door. Frank and I have, in the months since, become the kind of neighbors we had not been in 3 years of living side by side. We talk over the fence sometimes. He brings tomatoes from his garden in August, the good ones, the kind you eat standing up over the sink. I bring him things occasionally when I have made too much of something. He removed the camera in October. He told me over the fence, matter-of-factly, that he had never intended to keep it up permanently and that the reason for it was resolved. I said, "Thank you for keeping the footage." He said, "You would have done the same." I thought about that. I said, "Yes, I would have." Gloria, on the other side, knows everything. This is Gloria's nature. She knows everything on the street and manages the knowledge with the specific, practiced discretion of someone who has understood for a long time that knowing things and saying things are not the same obligation. She has never, to my knowledge, mentioned any of it to anyone. I am genuinely fond of Gloria.
I want to say something about the drive and what it represents, because I think it is the most important thing in this story, and it is not about David. The drive is a small thing, ordinary plastic, the kind you buy in packs of 5, containing 7 months of footage that a retired man in his 60s collected because he saw something in March that he did not understand and decided to keep watching until he did. Frank did not know me well. We had exchanged 40 words in 3 years. He had no particular obligation to me, no reason to spend 7 months recording footage on my behalf, no guarantee that when I told him he would not turn it against him. He did it anyway, because he saw something and he thought someone should know, and because when I came to his door and asked directly, he decided that a direct question deserved a direct answer. I came to his door furious about a camera pointed at my yard. I left with the thing that changed everything. The most important information in my life in that period did not come from my husband or my attorney or my closest friends. It came from a man I barely knew who had been paying attention to something he had no obligation to pay attention to, and who handed me a USB drive and said, "I'm sorry." Pay attention to the people who pay attention. They are often the ones who have what you need. She doesn't stay silent. She doesn't stay broken. She rises. Sometimes rising starts with a neighbor you've barely spoken to in 3 years. Sometimes the door you need to knock on is the one next door. Subscribe. New story every week, and every single one of them ends the same way. She rises. Leave a comment. Have you ever found out something important from the last person you expected? I read every single one.